Hey, hello all. Today it's the first episode of the Astrologer's Diary series that I'm doing in order to capture the lives and experiences of the astrologers of our times. So my first guest is going to be Nadia Smirnova-Mierau, and thank you so much for doing this with me, and welcome to the show.
Yes, hi, Aspen. Do I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, cool.
Yes, it's my pleasure, and I'm honored to be the first on your channel.
Yeah, I've been meaning to do an interview with you for quite a long time, and it's not like I think I got in touch with you somewhere similar times in 2018 when I was trying to start or launch my e-magazine. So that was when I kind of got in touch with you, and I've been having a lot of insights and advice from you since then. And it has been a wonderful journey of 1 year, and I'm thankful that you are here for my channel today. So this is basically like to record your story as an astrologer, not just as an astrologer, but also your life experiences, like even since you are born, whatever you remember, and how you came about your life. So I'm sure you have like various experiences with your multicultural exposure that you had. So when did it start, and like from birth?
Do you mean when did my life start?
Yeah, so that was probably the first starting point.
Yeah, well, my life started quite a while ago in Moscow, Russia. I'm not going to tell you the exact year, but
Okay.
I've been around the block. And somewhere in 97, I moved to United States. But while I was in Russia, I lived my life like everybody else, but I wondered about life a lot. I wondered what's going on, what's on the sky, and where do I come from? Why do I feel like I'm not fitting in on this earth? I'm not sure how to be. And I stumbled upon astrology and looked for answers in astrology in my teens
Okay.
and found lots of answers. Answers how to deal with my mother and why my relationship with my mother is very odd comparing to other children and their mothers. I found answers about my friends, why my friends are all different, why they're a certain way. And astrology fascinated me. I started learning about it very, very rapidly since my teens. And then also physics and mathematics were fascinating to me. I was very good at it. So that's how I ended up in physics department of Moscow University and started studying nuclear physics. And in Moscow University, I did have a lot of fun because I found a lot of smart kids, like-minded people. However, physics itself, as much as I loved it, some aspects of it didn't kind of add up to me because I'm also very much Piscean. I would say I have several planets in Pisces, so I'm psychically in tuned, not just very well developed in the left brain, but also very much right brain person. So a lot of stuff, even related to sciences and physics, I was processing both with left and the right brain, with logic, but also how does it feel? Does it feel right to me? And some things just my brain could not accept. There was some kind of intuitive rejection through against certain concepts in physics. And only now I'm finding out why. Because I left physics department many years ago. I moved to US, and even though I was involved in fine art business for many years, and I still do, and I did astrology, I still was fond of physics, and I was learning a lot about it. And then I discovered things that started adding up to me. I discovered alternative physics, alternative sciences. I discovered Nassim Haramein. I discovered some other researchers, both in US and Russia, who actually finally make sense. And what they do is they question mainstream physics. And that's how I found my like-minded people who feel the same way I feel. They know something is not right, so they question it. And that's how I was questioning it. But when I was questioning it in my head, I, at that time when I was young, I just couldn't question it out loud because I was in the mainstream institution learning physics. I had to learn and I had to pass and I had to get my grades. I had to be a good student. So if I would question it out loud, then I wouldn't graduate.
Yeah.
So, yes. So at that time, certain things that didn't feel right and didn't add up in my head, I simply had to learn and memorize. And that was the hardest thing for me, is learn and memorize so I can pass and get my grades. Things that did make sense to me, there were a lot of them too, things that did make sense, those were easy to learn and deal with because I didn't have to even learn them. I had to understand them, and then it goes into the right segment of the brain, and then you never forget because it makes sense. Things that didn't make sense, I completely forgot all of that. Right after I passed my exams for those things, I forgot all of them like a nightmare. But now I understand. Now I understand the reality a lot better from a different angle that does make sense, that goes beyond what mainstream science teaches us. And I'm very happy about it. And I'm actually happy knowing both sides, because those scientists in the mainstream, they're not bad people who try and teach us bad things that don't make sense, right? They're good people. They're just within the system. This is how they learned. And it's not easy for them to remember these things and make sense of them for the students. So they're all good people, but I could see that they're majorly confused. And this is why it's hard for mainstream science to explain a lot of things. Like, for example, it's hard for them to explain what gravity is. They can't. They don't know what it is, right? Because they learned it from a wrong angle. And we used to have the right angle in the 19th century. We used to know about ether, right? And Mr. Tesla was coming from that knowing, the knowing of the ether as a medium that penetrates all of us, and we all made out of it. So coming from that concept, he made a lot of discoveries, over 800 patents, right? But in the beginning of 19th century, we dismissed ether based on the wrong interpretation of an experiment, right? We dismissed the idea of ether, and from that point, it became very, very difficult to invent new things and make sense of gravity, make sense of a lot of concepts in physics and in quantum physics. So, but now quite a few scientists who still work in the mainstream are coming back to the idea of ether and literally fight for it. And it's very refreshing to observe this. It's alternative. It's not accepted by mainstream. So there is sort of a Cold War going on between bright minds in the world. And it's very refreshing to watch it.
So I think you gave a very good bird's eye view of things that you have a perspective towards. So let's again go back to, you said that you were into astrology ever since you were teen. So do you have a specific moment or do you remember something very specific that kind of pulled you or drew you towards astrology as a teenager? And I'm sure you were in school by then. So how did the first point of attraction towards astrology come? And especially, I think you are a scientifically qualified person, and there are a lot of things that I really want to discuss with you from that that side as well, in terms of balancing the skeptics and science and astrology as well. It's a very difficult thing to do, being a major figure in the science community. So but first, let's explore your basic level of attraction towards astrology, the first point of infatuation that we all have.
Yes, as I may have mentioned, I did have a very difficult relationship with my mother growing up since I was a child.
Yeah.
And I was analyzing on a daily basis what is going on. Why other kids are happy with their parents and I'm not happy with my parent? You know, what is happening? I was looking for answers, and I felt very strongly that maybe I don't belong to Earth, that my mother is not my mother, and some kids, or new souls they call them, sometimes have those feelings. So I was hoping that the UFOs will come and pick me up and take me from Earth because I hate it there. So there was those thoughts coming through my head, and I've seen the UFOs when I was at the age of 12. So I thought those were my people. Please come and get me. But then continuously trying to search for answers, there was a moment where somebody or something, I don't clearly remember how it happened, but somebody mentioned astrology. And specifically it started with the year of birth, right? So I'm a fire horse and my mother was a rat by the year. And at first I found that it is in opposition, you know, these type of signs in opposition to each other, which means they do have a contradiction in their approach to life. And I started reading about it. Suddenly I felt like when I was reading it, the personality of a rat versus personality of a fire horse, then I realized, boy, this all basically describes my relationship with my mother. And then after that, I kept digging. Then I discovered zodiac signs, right? She's a Capricorn, I'm an Aries, and Aries will always look for freedom when dealing with the Capricorn parent and try to break away from restrictions that the Capricorn parent applies. And that's all was speaking very highly about my dynamic with my mother. And that suddenly it explained to me what's going on, why we have such a difficult situation between the two of us. It made me feel at ease that it's all by design, that that's the first thing, that you don't want to take it personal as a child when something like that is happening, right? It's not your fault. It's basically by design. And realization of that gave me a freedom of understanding that it's just a design for my life, and I have to work around it, and I have to deal with it. And at the end, I was grateful to my mother, actually. At the end of all of that, I realized that the way I am right now, with my critical thinking, with my balanced left-right brain, well-trained in my childhood, I would say, is all because we had that dynamic, because I was searching for answers. I think if I was very happy and relaxed like my friends are, I would not be searching for answers.
Okay.
I would not be interested in life. So I think I'm very grateful to my mother for that, among other things.
Okay. So that's very actually motivating to see that you have taken a lot of positives from some of the negative sides that you saw in your life during the early phase itself. So so you were interested in astrology, and you kind of fell into astrology bug kind of caught hold of you very soon in your life. So how did the university days and your PhD days come in alignment with astrology? Were you kind of interested in astrology at that point as well? And were you kind of continuing your studies, or were you kind of following up with your interest that you had in your teens in the university and your PhD as well?
Yes. So once that happened, I got hooked on astrology, And eventually we had some books that, like Linda Goodman is one of them, was translated into Russian, and it's international, as I find, #1 book that gets people hooked on astrology. So that book got into my hands maybe in my 20s.
Okay.
So I was fascinated with how accurate it is. And then there was more. And then I found the group of people, my friends in Moscow University, who are also interested in astrology. Somehow we all started getting together and exchanging books. And I got my first chart done by a friend. I was maybe 19 or 20 when I got my chart done first time. At that time, there was no computer programs, and the charts were done by hand, which is adorable. And I had that first chart all hand drawn for a long time, my first chart. And then from my first chart, I got my first readings by my friends who were just a little more advanced in astrology because they learned a little ahead of me. And I got my first reading, which fascinated me, because the things that they said were very unusual to hear for me at that time, but then they all came true later on, years after, they all came true. So, and my friends were pretty new to astrology to begin with, so I guess whatever they managed to read at that time, and we did have books of Radyar also translated into Russian, which were very deep, and my friends consider it, if you read Radyar, that means a very highly developed person. So to read Radyar was something like, a pedigree type of signature amongst young astrologers. So I guess whatever they read, they started putting two and two together, how to read charts, and combining with their right brain, attraction to astrology and intuition, they were given pretty accurate answers, like as if they were experienced astrologers, which is great. And then at some point, I think I was 21. I remember when, after reading one of those books and looking at the charts, suddenly I learned how to draw my own charts for people, also by hand. And then suddenly I remember that it just hit me, oh, I can do it. Suddenly I realized I can put two and two together between aspects, planets, and a human personality and a life. Suddenly I felt like I've read enough. Now I can do my own readings with people. And once that happened, I did a couple of readings for people here and there for friends. Suddenly the word started getting around and I started getting paid for it.
Okay.
I was 20 or 22. I was still finishing my master's and going into PhD program. Around that time, then I started getting paid for astrology readings. Not a big money, but still it was very interesting for me to find myself doing professional work.
Great.
That was phenomenal. And I started realizing that once I started doing my own readings, the self-learning process continued besides the books. Like once you start practicing, you learn more and more while practicing.
Yeah.
Like you don't just need to learn everything from books. You could learn from the process with the live interaction with people. And then the more the merrier. At some point when I graduated and I left the PhD program because the economy collapsed in Russia. So I left in the middle of it. I found myself practicing astrology full time. So I started advertising in the papers, and that was still in my 20s, advertising in the papers and having regular clients. And I've been doing that all the way until 1997 when I left for US. And that was very interesting. To this day, people who know me, and I did some predictions for them like years in advance. And then I left, they would find me years later when things transpire that I predicted, and they would give me feedback. Hey, remember you predicted so-and-so? It's happening.
Okay.
So that was very, very interesting.
So you basically left Russia because of the economic fallout?
One of the things, right? And because with my education and my abilities and desires and outlook on life, I just, at that time, the Russia was so wild and people were trying to get their basic needs met and survive, because the system collapsed and a new system was building, and it was very raw, very basic, and I could not deal with very basic stuff. I was like on a high level, if you could say, of intellectual development, and my desires and my abilities just didn't fit the environment. Like I didn't feel like striving for survival, which, and I thought, let me try and go to US and see how that system is stable and see how it's there. Besides, I looked around astrologically around the world, and I did the astrogeocartography for myself, a research, and I found that I belong to US. I belong with US. I don't belong in Moscow. It's not my place. So, and I found that New York has a PowerPoint for, it's a power place for me. My chart basically explodes. Everything is in the right places in terms of houses when I moved to New York. That's how I moved. And I did have to like struggle for my survival for the first couple of years, that like every immigrant has to do in US. But I felt belonging in US. I felt that immediately with my right brain, with my intuition. The minute I landed, I felt this is my place. I'm staying. I feel that vibration coming through, my body, that this is the place where I'm going to be thriving.
Okay. So, did you continue with your PhD program in the USA?
No. I dropped out of physics
Okay.
right when the economy collapsed, because at that time, the financing for physics was drastically reduced, and our nuclear institute virtually could not afford to keep scientists. A lot of scientists were flushed out from the system, and they went into businesses that were simple businesses designed to rebuild the country economy at that time. And they just started doing simple things. Some of them became like cab drivers. Some of them started doing like food related businesses or something, basic stuff. Scientists, not too many scientists were left working in sciences because the financing dropped. Huge devaluation of ruble happened, and scientists just could not feed their families. So a lot of them moved to other countries where they were able to find jobs. Like there was a lot of what's called brain drainage from Russia. Lots of scientists who wanted to stay in the science and do what they love to do, they had to leave the country. And not too many at that time were staying. And some of the smart ones became bankers and eventually became very rich. Like my own schoolmates became very famous and very wealthy because they were smart, so they figured it out with the banking system. And others managed to stay in science, and then science basically went into a slow recovery.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you basically moved to US as a full-time astrologer, right? And you started practicing astrology.
Yeah, well, I came to US, yes, and at that time I was still thinking that I'm going to be studying. I'm going to be practicing astrology, and I did started that a little bit when I came. But also I was an artist as well. Okay. That part I didn't mention, but I've always been an artist, and I've gone to art school besides physics. So when I came to US, I felt like, okay, I'm an artist, I'm an astrologer, and I'm a scientist. What a girl to do. So I've explored all these directions, and I found that I could do anything. Like I have this the country that gives me all these opportunities. I can try and go back to physics, or I can do art, or I can do astrology. But so I ultimately chose art, and I started a business that has to do with art and reproductions, and these are based,
Yeah, I
yeah,
figured.
my design. So to this day, I work with artists, and I still have the business where I cater to artists and galleries. But in terms of astrology, I left it for several years on the back burner. So I was still doing readings here and there, but it was not my main source of income or my main thing for quite a few years. However, I did do the radio show because there are some, I was always hanging and being friendly with all sorts of alternative practitioners, psychics and healers and other astrologers. I was in touch with them. So somehow they invited me to do a radio show. For 2 years, I was doing a radio show while catering to artists as my sort of day job. And then at some point, I started doing more astrology, more readings, more astrology, little by little. And all of that time while I was working with artists, I was working on my physics of astrology. Ever since I came to US, within the first 2 years, I suddenly had this realization how astrology works, because I've always stayed a physicist and a scientist in my subconscious mind. So I was thinking, because I had all these friends who were physicists, and they were asking me, how does astrology work? They see that I do astrology, I do readings, and they ask me, how does it work? And they try to kind of ridicule me, try to poke fun at me, like, how can you be a scientist and believe in that stuff? So, and those were all friendly sort of friendly ridicule and suggestions. And we're all friends. And I kind of thought, okay, these are my friends. I feel like I owe them an explanation, a reasonable explanation, left brain explanation. So it got me thinking. I started thinking really, really hard. And suddenly I had this moment of revelation when I suddenly knew how to explain it to them. And from that point, I started putting it in writing. And I was writing it in Russian first. Then I decided, okay, here I'm in America, so I have to write it in English. And I started building a website, and the website was out there for years, where I put a set of my articles explaining how astrology works. And eventually, recently, in the past 2 years, I finally put it in the form of a book, published it on Amazon, series of books, and started doing it a little more publicly, explaining how astrology works.
Okay, the Physics of Astrology series. I think now 7 books are out, and you're working on the further stuff, right?
Right. So the Physics of Astrology ebook series is on Amazon right now. Physical Astrology by Nadia Smirnova-Mierau. And it's 7 books that basically outline the framework of my framework of how astrology works, explained in terms of mainstream science mostly. However, there are quite a few things that I mentioned there from alternative physics, but it's all physics. It's all physics, mainstream or alternative, it's all physics. And so essentially, astrology is explained with the familiar terms and in a very easy way. And what I'm trying to do is, knowing that my audience would be people who are interested in astrology, and those people are mostly non-scientifically educated, so to speak, right brain people for the most part. And especially in America, I noticed that not too many people take physics in school. So I realized early on that my approach should be more visual, less ratios, less formulas, less numbers, less complicated stuff, more sort of the feeling of it, the texture, the how can you experience, how can you understand with your right brain how astrology works. And I found that it's not so difficult to explain. Essentially, some things I can explain in one sentence to people, but also when I encounter left brain people, like my friends or friends of friends who are, say, very technical, they're scientists or they might be programmers, so they're very left brainy people. when they ask me questions, I can find a language how to explain to them so they understand as well. So, and that's what I'm trying to do. I don't like when physics is complicated and it scares right brain people. Like, I don't like when scientists are throw numbers, these incredible numbers at you, or throw these formulas or these names of scientists who did this or did that, make it sound so out of reach for people. People literally intimidated by the word physics, I found. I don't like that. I don't think that physics should be intimidating. It's just physics. It's just, how things work. Sometimes I like to think of it that I specialize in explaining how things work in life. Not physics of it, but how things work in a simple terms so anybody can understand. How astrology works in simple terms so anybody can understand.
Yeah.
A little bit of mainstream terminology, of course, a little bit, but any of that terminology can be explained easily so anybody can understand, even people who never took physics.
Yeah, I saw one of your videos on YouTube where you explained about the basic understanding of how astrology can be a science with the moon and ocean tides example, and how it is related to the brain. So brain is kind of placed in fluid. So that was an excellent kind of explanation that you gave, and I just hope all the skeptics kind of see that video and also check out your books, which are the Physics of Astrology series. So as it is, you are one of the most important figures in the astrological community who kind of emphasizes the scientific part of astrology or establishes astrology as a scientific phenomenon. And how have you dealt with, and you mentioned that you had friends who were kind of pulling your legs in terms of how can you do that being a scientist or a physicist or something like that. But that is among the friends that cannot be a huge agitation, or it won't even erupt like anything. You can just give a rationalized explanation which can kind of satisfy the friends. But have you ever dealt with the actual scientific community, people who kind of debunk or play a spoil sport with astrology? Have you ever retaliated or responded to such critics?
A little bit, but not extensively. So far, I've encountered a couple of just rude remarks from physicists or former physicists here and there on social media.
Okay.
Like literally without any logic, a rude remark is, BS. What a BS is this? And this typically, I expect, happens from people who rejected astrology from the get-go without even opening their mind to get to know what it is. So, because there is one thing is logic, right? And logical, normal, respectful conversation between people. And there's another thing is guidelines, right? And belonging to a group and bullying people who don't belong to the group. That's a whole other phenomenon, right? So I did not encounter much of it, just maybe glimpses here and there. However, I've read a lot of articles and I watched people doing it to each other. So I observed it, so to speak. So my personal friends, they're really, really nice people. They love me and they're very respectful. So when they were questioning me, it was all more friendly, poking fun type thing. So we would argue about things, but it was always friendly arguing over a glass of wine or over tea and cake or something, right? Where they would ask me, so tell us, and they would come on to me, so tell us, what is it? Why are you so religious about astrology, and then I would explain to them, to me, it's not a religion. It just works. Here, read the book of Linda Goodman. And I'll tell you a story. When that was happening in the beginning of stages, when I was still in Moscow University and I was still surrounded by my friends, also students, young physicists, I remember that I was so passionately and hungrily studying astrology and reading Linda Goodman books and practicing doing readings. And I was so passionate, so I was telling my friends about it, and they were very skeptical, so they didn't want to learn it, so they were just conditioned to laugh at it. It's a conditioning. That's what's happening. It's a conditioning in the mainstream science, conditioning against anything that doesn't belong with the mainstream, meaning conditioning against psychic stuff, conditioning against palm reading, conditioning against astrology. Is like they conditioned that they don't go there. So if they want to belong with this elite group of people and call themselves scientists, they cannot go in that direction. So it's a conditioning. So the conditioning was happening very soft. It's not obvious. It's like you conditioned to be in this society, in this social group. So, and I remember that my friends were skeptical because they were conditioned, but they, on the other hand, they liked me and they loved me. So one of them, and he was Virgo by the sign, right? So he asked me, so prove to me that it works. And I said, I'll tell you what, take Linda Goodman book home and read this chapter about Virgos and read this chapter about Aries, which is me. Only 2 chapters, read both of them and let me know what you think tomorrow. He said, I'll tell you what, and he's a Virgo. He said, I'll take a green pen and I take a red pen. And whatever I feel fits the description, I'm gonna mark with the green pen. Whatever doesn't fit the description and I think it's bullshit, I'm gonna mark with the red pen. And I'll come back to you and we'll discuss. And I think that's a good, respectful, correct, scientific, logical approach. I like this type of skeptics who are respectful and they give it a chance. So I said, fantastic. He walked away. Next day he came back and he had very sort of humble look on his face. I should have photographed him. He had a very humble look on his face. He brought the book back. Everything was marked in green. And he said, Nadia, when I read about Aries woman, I had the feeling Linda Goodman knows you personally.
I think that is the biggest ever compliment.
Yeah, coming from a young physicist who was very skeptical, and he literally gave it a chance with his critical mind. He marked pretty much everything in green. Both the article about Virgo and an article about Aries, and he gave me the book back, and he never argued with me ever again.
Great.
That was beautiful. And I'll tell you other things. Is one other friend, he never believed it, didn't want to listen about it. However, when my birthday came, he gave me a present, a book about palm reading, right? And that was a very respectful gift. So he gave it to me, not just to please me, but it also was a respectful gift. Like if he felt that, okay, there might be something there. So, and another friend who also was very skeptical about it, never wanted any readings, never wanted to hear about it. But when a very, very something serious came into his life, like he had to change a job.
Okay.
And he has these 2 other positions or 2 other places to go. And it was he had to make a very, very serious decision that his future 20 years will depend on it. 20 years of his life on a decision that he would make. And he was very intimidated by how serious decision he had to make. He came for a reading.
Great.
He came for a reading, and very interesting that, the reading came true, basically. So, not everything in the reading was that he wanted to hear. There was something that he didn't like. in a reading, however it came true later on. So so that was the my friends. And in terms of other encounters with other skeptics, what I found is it's interesting that there is something happening on the internet and the social media. Is there is debunking war going on, right? So we probably all know it. And there is a set of guidelines that are being publicized everywhere, like on Wikipedia, for example. If you read about what astrology is on Wikipedia, it's called a pseudoscience. So calling it a pseudoscience is essentially is a political guideline, like conditioning of human beings who read Wikipedia or trust it, conditioning to think of astrology that way. And they don't give you a reason why would they call it that way. It's just a name. It's a name calling. It's a conditioning. That's what they're doing. And say another article you could find is that, like for example, I make a claim that gravity, phenomenon of gravity, explains how astrology works. So what they do is, and I'm probably not the only one who said the word gravity in terms of explaining astrology. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to condition people to not take it seriously by publishing articles where they say, well, if you calculate the gravity of the Jupiter, the effect of Jupiter on a baby versus the gravity of a doctor who's holding a baby, the effect of the doctor is higher, much larger, stronger in terms of gravity than a Jupiter, right? So, or mosquito that is landing on your shoulder, or the effect, gravitational effect of mosquito is going to be more powerful than the one of Jupiter. So that's their way to try and debunk the idea of gravitational effect on us, right? So that's a conditioning, but that's they using not so subtle ways to distract people and deceive people simply because people already intimidated of the word of physics, right? They put it in a part of their brain is it's something I don't understand, right?
Okay.
They have a lot of people have a like a big black hole in their brain where they put all things that they don't understand. And so they say, oh, I don't understand those things. So that's sitting in that part of the brain. But, you know, you can take it out and understand it. It's just so easy if you look at it from a different perspective in terms of gravity. Gravity is greatly misunderstood in the mainstream science. Scientists don't know what gravity is. Scientists don't know how to connect the gravity to electromagnetic forces. They basically separated them in the beginning of 100 years ago. They separated them into two different phenomena, and they don't know how to connect them. They're trying with string theory and some other theories, but so far in the mainstream, there is no solid, popularized and obvious connection between them. And that's a shame because gravity and electromagnetic forces are interconnected. Alternative physicists know that. And as a matter of fact, the government knows it, and they're, you know, from what we hear, the black projects, they're all based on alternative physics, you know. And the Germans making their UFOs under Hitler also, they were using alternative physics. They weren't using mainstream physics. They were using alternative physics, and that's how they made their UFOs and were doing what they're doing, and they're very advanced in their sciences. So you can only advance the science if you actually look around outside of the box of the mainstream. And the mainstream seems to be playing very safe because within the mainstream, there's only so much you could do. And you can't really do more than that. And once you go outside mainstream, like Tesla, right? You can invent and invent and invent, and so many, and its possibilities unlimited.
Okay. So and that was actually quite fascinating to listen to. So, and your astrology, your foray as an astrologer and your business related to astrology started flourishing, and you got so many recognitions. So, would you like to talk about some of the major recognitions that you got in the field of astrology and your associations with various organizations and events? Especially, you spoke about UAC, the recently concluded UAC in 2018 May or June. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It's
and your associations with the organizations and your role and how you kind of grew along with the organization as an astrologer and also a major public figure in the astrological community.
Yes, I belong to a couple of organizations. I belong to one for 20 years, and then another. And the organizations are nice communities of astrologers, and I got to know a lot of astrologers. I'm very grateful to the organizations and to the UAC. I've been to several UACs. I'm very grateful for getting to know astrologers in person. But in the present day and age, it's interesting that these organizations are no longer provide the majority of majority of influence in terms of development of astrology and astrology education, because social media really heavily switched gears between organizations being the it thing, being the main social community for the astrologers. Now all the communities grow on their own on Facebook and on YouTube and in social media and in Instagram. So astrologers now, there are many astrologers who don't belong to organizations, but they have their own organization, or they belong to groups where they hang out, and they become influencers in their own way, on their own kind. And some of them who formerly felt like an outcast in the astrology community, they formed their own communities, like the same as a KRS channel, right? Okay. So he has his own community, his own organization. So he doesn't need to belong to any organization.
Sure.
Or the Leo King, David Palm. He has his own. He doesn't need anybody. Or Nadia Shah. He's an influencer in his own right. She belongs to organizations, but she doesn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Her following is much bigger than any of those organizations, because the organizations consist of maybe 1,000, 2,000 astrologers, but the following of these people is 500,000 of people. Yes, so the organizations became obsolete, and going forward, they're becoming they basically becoming unattractive to young generation. Okay. And young generation is forming their own organizations, or they simply just belong into Facebook group. Facebook became the platform for new organizations to blossom and form. Like Michelle Young, for example, she has her own organization, which is called Keep It Simply Serious. Right.
Yeah, I have personal experiences with that group. It is one of the most promising, not promising, it's already well established, but it is one of the most useful groups related to astrology that we can find. So,
it's a high quality group, and it does a lot for community, a lot more for community than traditional organizations. I have to admit that. The way that Michelle is monitoring that group, and I hope that you're going to put a link to that group under this video.
Sure.
The way that she's monitoring that group and engaging everybody, they have serious quality discussions in that group. It's a lot more of that than any traditional organizations. Traditional organizations don't have that happening. It's all happening within the organization that Michelle created, and or other, other people create. There are so many of these groups. There are groups that have 30, 50,000 of people in the group, and they have very, very active discussions happening. This is all on social media.
Yeah, for sure. So, and this is probably one of the most important questions that I think I can ask only you. So, what do you think of astrology in Russia? And I think it is another unique place. Like, I'm exploring what is happening in the West, and I'm trying to bridge the astrology in India and astrology in other places. So, how is astrology in Russia, and what is the shape of mainstream astrology in Russia?
Yes, I do come from Astrology and Astrology Academy in Russia originally, and that's where I started. However, I've been detached from it for the past 20 years.
Okay.
And I just started looking back and see what's happening. What do astrology do? There's still astrology, several schools in Russia, very popular, and they're strong. And the school of astrology is very strong. These astrologers are very serious people, and I know some of them are trying to. Some of them are affiliated with some organizations in US, so there is some sort of bridging going on. At least I know of one organization that has a satellite in Russia, which is Astrology of Organization for Professional Astrology, OPA.
Okay.
So they have a satellite in Russia, I know. And NCGR used to have a astrology chapter in Russia, used to have 20 years ago. That's how I joined that organization while being in Russia, but they don't anymore. So that did not work out for a long time ago. But OPA has it, and I don't know if other organizations have it, but there's still work to be done in bridging Russian astrology with the international community. There is a lot more work to be done. However, what I find is it might be easier to bridge Indian astrology. It is easier to bring Indian astrology with American, just simply because my understanding that most India is English speaking. You guys speak English, it's something that is very valuable, is being able to converse easily. In Russia, it's not the case, even though Russians take second language in school, but it's not that good.
Okay.
It's not that good. It's not easy. So everything needs to be translated. A lot of people who do astrology in Russia, their English is very poor.
Okay.
Very few, like if you well versed in English and you live in Russia, it's a high level skill. That means you have either traveled to US or lived maybe in US or England, and you have and you put a lot of effort into learning the language, so you would be able to converse internationally. So it's a luxury to have in Russia. So language barrier is a barrier.
Okay.
In that respect. So that's why being bilingual as myself, I feel like I have to find a way to bridge these countries and have a common dialogue. I found a lot of interesting people in Russia right now, like watching lots of presentations, lectures on YouTube in Russia, in Russian language, and I find that it is. I'm so lucky to be bilingual because I can get the best of both worlds. And I'm thinking I owe it to the world to give back to both worlds, right? To bridge it, to translate some interesting ideas, concepts, interviews from English into Russian and vice versa. And that's what I'm thinking I might be doing in the near future, is inviting some Russian people for an interview also on YouTube and translating that interview for American audience, something very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's very noble, and I don't know if any other person can actually accomplish this task if not you. So I'm looking forward to see how you are going to take that forward. And yeah, I think we are pretty much there towards the end of the show. And if you have any other final thoughts or something that you have to say, and I think you can talk about the webinars. Even I attended one webinar, and it was kind of a wake up call to me to understand that astrology can be viewed scientifically from a very simplistic and a realistic point of view, not to
Aspen, I lost the sound from you suddenly.
Is it okay?
Yes, this is good now.
Okay, yeah, I think I would like to ask you about the webinars and stuff that you have been doing, because I attended one of the webinars that you gave, and I'm thankful and grateful for the opportunity that you gave. So I think that was one of the most important wake-up calls that I had in terms of viewing astrology as a scientific phenomenon from a very simplistic and a realistic point of view. And I kind of stuck to those things that I learned from your webinar, and I think you don't really need to retaliate or respond to any critics, but I think your webinars and your books on the series of physics of astrology can actually vouch or speak for itself in terms of establishing astrology as a scientific phenomenon. So I think you should talk something about your webinars and where people can find your webinars, and also what are your future offerings and ideas that you have in your mind in terms of bridging astrology as a science, an actual science.
Yes, sounds good. Sounds good, Aspen. Yes, if you guys are interested in learning how things work in life from the perspective of science and astrology, you're welcome to find my website. It's called physicsofastrology.com. And you can sign up for my mailing list, and I'll usually send out infrequent newsletters to announce my live webinars, and you can find recordings of my webinars. There's a separate website. It's called astrologyisscience.com. It's a platform where I put my courses and webinars all about physics of astrology and physics of extrasensory perception, and where I teach a little bit about extrasensory perception, and not just how to understand it from scientific point, but also I'm teaching some practical science-based techniques a little bit. This year I'm putting together interesting topics to discuss in live webinars, and one of them actually is based on a request of one of my students. During one of the webinars, one of my students asked me if I'm familiar with the hollow earth concept, and I said, of course, I'm familiar and very passionate about it. So she approached me to do webinars. So I'm planning to do a webinar on strange physics of Earth, where I'm going to discuss the concept of the solid Earth versus hollow Earth, and which physics is better and why. And it basically also will lead to a light bulb for a lot of people, understanding of how planets form to begin with, how they operate, and it's based on physics, but partly in alternative physics. Alternative physics that is still physics. It explains how things work in life. And it's Tesla physics. It's a real physics, but it's a physics that not really widely accepted by mainstream, and not for good reasons. Let me put it this way. But it's fascinating material, and it literally blows people's minds. So I'm actually honored and very happy to present my ideas, my findings, and a lot of my findings and my ideas come from observing and digesting what other people do, of course, and I use both left and right brain when I process the information. There's so much information on the internet, and I only absorb the information that makes sense to me. And if it makes sense to me, then I come up with some ideas based upon those ideas. And what I found is recently is a lot of good mainstream scientists in Russia question their own mainstream science and develop their own fascinating framework based on better scientific ideas that are kind of considered alternative, but they're actually better scientific ideas that explain a lot more stuff. These ideas and this framework can explain what gravity is, like mainstream can't explain. They can explain what electricity or what magnetism is. Mainstream science cannot answer those questions. They explain how the Earth works, why it expands, and why it rotates around the sun a certain way. So there's so much coming from it that it's overwhelming. I don't find the analog of that in English-based teachings. Some of it. I found some American alternative researchers and scientists who work in that direction, but not as overwhelming as I found in Russia. That's why I want to bring that knowledge, quote those people, and throw some of my ideas that are based on what they said, but basically developing what they're doing further. So that's what I'm planning. This is one of the webinars that I'm planning to do in the very near future in February. And also there are some other interesting topics that I want to present and maybe present the different angles of what's already presented. And I want to talk about sacred geometry that is part of the world that we live in terms of astrology and physics. And also I want to talk about dark matter a little bit. Okay. That's yes, it's a lot of fun, but what does it have to do with the world that we live in, and what is it exactly, and what it has to do with astrology and things like that. And one of the webinars that I'm going to present is about love, because one of the things I didn't mention to you is 10 years out of my life, besides my art business and astrology, I worked as a professional matchmaker. So that was my own quest for discovery what love is, both from psychology and from astrology and physics perspective. So one of the webinars that I'm looking to do, a live webinar, has to do with physics and astrology of love, and my discoveries, what it is. I'm excited to share that. And there are quite a few topics. So if you guys subscribe to my mailing list, you'll know, firsthand everything that I do, and you could join and watch the webinars, join live webinars, or watch the recordings, and write questions, send questions to me, or requests even.
Yeah. So the websites are physicsofastrology.com and astrologyscience.com, where people can find out the information about your webinar and also the previous pre-recorded webinars, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So I think that pretty much brings us towards the end of the show, and I think you are on a road to some of the amazing things that probably the astrological community is going to look forward to, in terms of bridging the Russian astrological community with the international astrological community. And I think you are probably the best person that I know of who can do that, because you come from Russia and you have an international background, and also you have your own face value, and you have a huge amount of following as well. So I think you are the best person to do that, and I wish all fortune and luck coming your way in terms of accomplishing whatever you want to do ahead in life. And thank you so much for coming over.
And thank you, Aswin. And I also wish you a really good luck with what you're doing, because it's a very noble thing. You're trying to um, popularize astrology in your own way and bring some interesting topics into a discussion and bridge the Indian curious people and American curious people about astrology together to participate in community research, community knowledge, and development into like community knowing what is going on. That's very noble, and wish you good luck in that. If you need any help, so by all means, I'll be there to help.
Sure. Thank you so much, and we'll get back soon.
Sounds good.